Hello and welcome to the AMTS video manual for AMTS cattle and AMTS small ruminant nutritional software. This is part of a suite of short tutorials on program functionality. As with the other videos in this series, you can find subtitles for several languages if you click on the CC controls. This video is a tutorial on the setup and functionality of the Advanced Optimizer in AMTS.Farm for cattle and for small ruminants. Released as part of a semi-annual program update in December of 2020, this optimizer replaces the previous Genetic Algorithm Advanced Optimizer. You will find this to be a fairly long video, but in it, Dr. Tom Taluki, AMTS CEO, not only walks us through the functionality of the new optimizer, but also gives insight on his methodology in setting up his diets for optimization. He explains how he sets up feed constraints and the reasons he might not always have the same constraints. When he looks at outputs, he discusses which he selects for optimization and what steps he takes to more easily see his rations predictions. He provides pointers and quality of life enhancements built into the program that you can also set up to power up your formulation techniques. Accordingly, we have dropped in short tutorials on some of the program features Tom mentions. You will find this video useful not only for advanced optimization, but also helpful in setting up diets for linear optimization. Tom's insightful assessment of which output to pay attention to and information on desirable ranges is also pertinent for any ruminant nutritionist. So, even if you are not intending to use the Advanced Optimizer, we highly recommend watching the first half of this video.
So this new optimizer that we have developed and implemented is a totally different method of optimization than we have previously used. It's nonlinear. It's pretty reliable in terms of giving results back. To give you an idea of how this thing looks, how I use it, we'll do this example diet. So this group of cows that we're going to work with is formulated for around 100 pounds of milk. You can see the animal inputs here. It's a mature group, so we don't have any average daily gain or anything, but decent components. And this is a copy of a real group. To play with some of these optimizations, I'll make a copy of a group and call it a play group to do some of these what if scenarios. So the diet that we're going to work with is pretty conventional diet here in the Northeast, corn silage based, alfalfa silage, and then a mix of other ingredients. Because of some inventory constraints, we've got some tight constraints set here on things like the alfalfa silage. This is not normal for what we would typically do. We would typically have a lot more haylage in there, but we had a drought. So it's using this thing, using any optimizer to really get realistic results. It's very important that we set the feed constraints realistically. It helps to guide the optimizer basically as to where it should be looking instead of having everything wide open. It can come back with some really oddball results that are just not feasible to do on farm. So I always set my constraints as how I would think about these if I was formulating by hand. So that's going to include inventory constraints. It's going to include if we had anything contracted, if there was a minimum amount that I had to use, for an example, or a maximum amount. And these prices are all a few months old. I wish I could still get some of these ingredients at these prices. We all know what pricing's done. For most of the minerals for this exercise, I just have them set at very narrow constraints. I typically don't optimize all my minerals at the same time because by the time you're done setting all the constraints on everything, it's, especially when we're starting with a premix, there's not a lot of mineral formulation to do. So I'll just put some in as slack space and then go back and clean up some of the minerals manually. That's just the way that I work. So on the nutrient constraint side, with this optimizer, it's really, you really have to have these columns open that include the safe min and the safe max. If you don't see those, right click anywhere on this side of the screen and click on the show safe min max values. Now, what that does is the safe min and safe max are what we call hard constraints. So any solution that it finds has to be within the safe min, safe max. Anything between, for example, the safe min and the min, it will still accept. It might not accept it as the best solutions because it adds what we call a penalty function to it, where the further away you are from the min going towards the safe min, the higher that penalty. So it's still an acceptable diet, but it's not the best diet that it could find. So it'll keep looking, but those are realistic diets. And you can set the safe min the same as the min and the max the same as the safe max. And you see I've got some of that done. For example, on dry matter intake, both my safe min and my min are both set at 60 pounds. Now here's a little trick. If you want, let's say we wanted to increase the forage minimum to 45%. You could put 45% in for the minimum and then put in 45% for the safe minimum. But the way this screen is set up is this. If you input a value in the safe min column that is greater than the minimum column, it'll automatically set the minimum column to the same as the safe minimum. So just as an example, we'll take this 40 to 45. You'll see our minimum is now 45. It works the same way with the max and safe max. If we want to say change this max forage level, say to 65, if I put in 65 in the max column, it makes the safe max 65. So you can save yourself some input time just by thinking about where do you want those safe mins and safe maxes and just inputting those, thinking about how it's going to change the min and max as well. This template, this set of outputs that you see here is a template that we'll make available. It's called, on my computer, it's called Tom's Current. And I think we'll keep the name the same. There's several things with this template that are pretty neat the way I put it together. One is the order of nutrients is the order that I look at. Second is by default, it's got some things set here for the optimization that I optimize around. You'll see there's not many things I optimize around. And I also have things color coded. So for example, with the ME and MP, they're both here in yellow. Well, that's saying that the value is actually below the safe min. So that's coming up, so that'll make them in yellow. The red one here, PENDF, I've got it color coded so that if it's less than 20, it shows in red. Fermentable starch, if it's greater than 21, it shows up in red. So they're just there to give you quick guidelines as to what is and what isn't within your comfort zone. If you want to change these colors, if you want to change to have different ones show, I'm pretty sure that's in the manual of how to do that.
Tom is correct. It is in the manual. Here is a quick visual tutorial, however. You can add colors to the labels of your outputs two ways. First, right here in the recipe screen, right-click any place on the grid to bring up the Show Warning Settings control. Then, in the output desired, select the color for the violation warning. To remove the selection columns, right-click again on the grid. Click the warning setting to deselect. The second way to add warning label colors is through the Manage Outputs dropdown. There, select RO Templates, Manage Ration Outputs. When that control window opens, select the desired template from the dropdown and add the label warning alert color in the same fashion as through the right-click option that I showed previously.
Because it really does make things a little bit easier to evaluate quick when you're doing a lot of formulations. So what do I optimize around? I'm optimizing around forage NDF as a percent of body weight, between 0.74 and 0.76%. My ME and MP, I'm doing as a percent of required. And you'll see that I've got them here at 106 to 110 for energy, and for protein, 106 to 108. Now, why don't I have these at 100? Well, I started from an initial diet that we were running around 103, 104 pounds of milk in this group. So instead of going back and changing inputs, I just changed these percent of required because I knew that the cows were actually eating around this 60.5 pounds of intake. So I just was manipulating the percent required and trying to keep protein a little bit tighter than energy, just so that I wasn't running really high levels of protein and wasting all that nitrogen. The other one that I have here, you notice I do not have PE-NDF selected, but I do have PE-CHOC. Okay, so this is the input that's based off the minor work where Rick calls it PE-UNDF 240. We call it PE-CHOC. And I'm not really concerned in my diets in the Northeast with the minimum because we don't have that amazing forage quality. It's more, I'm concerned about the max and the potential to depress intake and depress milk flow by having this too high. So you'll see my maximum here is 6.05% of dry matter. You'll also see I don't do things like sugar, starch, or whatever, but I do fermentable starch. And that 21% maximum on fermentable starch, I am quite confident that that is really the max that I will go to. I've had enough experiences where that number's gotten up to 22 or 21.5, and we've seen some things either with milk volume or milk fat. I have seen cases where 22 works fine, but the PE-CHOC is upwards of like 6.5%. So there's this interaction of carbohydrate C and rumen-degraded starch that impacts dry matter intake, that impacts rumen flow, that impacts rumen health, everything. So it's somewhat dependent upon what forages are available, but 99% of the time on high producing cows, a 21% max on fermentable starch is a good place to be. In later lactation cows, I'll drop this down to 20, maybe even 19. My minimum fermentable starch, again, somewhat depends upon the forage base I'm working with, where if I'm dealing with a lot of really high quality grass silage that's in the low 40s NDF, and potentially lots of sugar and lots of acids, I may let that number drop down considerably, 14, 15 fermentable starch instead of the 19 minimum. But again, for diets in the Northeast US, the upper Midwest, most of the US, most of Canada, we're going to be in this ideally 19 to 21 range on fermentable starch across all groups on the farm. The other one that I'm doing, and this is a new one that we've only been able to optimize since the release of this new optimizer, is the ratio between palmitic and 18-1. The data out there kind of shows that if we want to maximize milk volume, milk fat, that there's a range there that we can work with. And what I have found to work really well is if I'm somewhere between 1.5 to 1 and 2 to 1. This herd, I know we've dialed it in a little bit more, that I find between 1.7 and 1.9, we get really good responses on milk volume and milk fat percentages. So thus milk fat yields are nice. I'm also doing full amino acids, keeping my lice between 3.19 to 3.3 lice to ME, and my methionine to ME. I'm pushing these cows a little bit more. This is based on some of the newer analysis from Cornell and Van Amberg's group, where in 655 biology, which is what we are, we want to have that methionine to maximize milk protein and milk volume, the ratio of 1.2 to 1. And given where milk protein value is right now here in the US, I'm pushing that between 1.2 and 1.25 to 1. The only other constraint I have here is DCAD. And you can see I've got a minimum of 325 and I'll let it go up to 375. If we look at that in relation to my ingredients, you'll see I don't have any potassium sources. So all of that DCAD bump is going to come in the form of bicarb, of sodium sources. And that's primarily a cost related decision as to why I'm not using anything like potassium carbonate. So with those set, and I've seen people with this optimizer set a whole lot more constraints, and it's behaving. But these constraints here that I've highlighted and are using are the ones that I formulate around day to day. So we'll just go to the Advanced Optimizer tab now. And there's a couple of things to focus on this screen. One is what's our objective function? Do we want to do this based on maximizing income over feed cost, or do we want to do it to minimize feed cost? We'll do minimize feed cost. The max number of solutions to show, it doesn't matter. We'll just have it show 10. And then this number of iterations. Okay, 18,000 may seem high. It's a good number. I mean, that's basically like if you were sitting there doing all the different combinations by yourself for 18,000 runs. That number we set automatically, and it's based upon the number of ingredients that you have in your diet. So if you've got less ingredients, that number of iterations will show lower. If you have more ingredients, it'll show higher. You can change the number of iterations, but we found that letting it run off these default number of iterations that it wants seems to work pretty well. So that's the only thing we've got to set. Click on Optimize. And then we just wait while it starts going through its calculations. You'll see the progress bar here as it's moving through all of those. In general, what I have found with this optimizer, it is seldom that it does not come back with solutions. One thing to note is if it cannot find solutions that meet all of the constraints, it will run through all of its iterations and then return a series of diets that are suboptimal. And then you can evaluate which nutrients it failed on. And this may be one of those examples. There we go. And it tells us, optimizer, we're unable to find a solution that satisfies all constraints. So we can come now over here and look at, okay, so you'll see that our intakes in red on these first two solutions. It actually resulted in higher levels of intake. So we can pretty much ignore those two right from the beginning. If we look at, for example, solution number 3, where it really struggled, the only thing that it was off on was the forage NDF as a percent of body weight. It was forced to go after a lower forage diet. Now, we could either accept one of these solutions, we could take a ration shot of it.
Here is how to take a ration shot from the Advanced Optimizer screen. You will note that one solution will be lightly highlighted. That is the solution that is referred to by any of these controls. So here, solution 1 is highlighted. When I click Take Ration Shot, that is the solution that the ration shot is of. To highlight a different solution, click on the appropriate column heading. To see the ration shots, click on the Ration Shot tab. The solutions will lose their optimizer solution number designation and are designated instead by a ration shot number, with the added designation of being an optimized ration shot.
Or we could just go back and say, you know, what constraints is it really struggling with? And give it some, change some of those results to give us, we'll just take out the forage NDF and we'll throw forage in by itself. We'll go with a safe min of 55 and a max of 50. Let's see, we're at 56, we'll go to 57. Go back and run it again.
After Tom went back to the outputs and changed the forage NDF as a percent of body weight to forage as a percent of dry matter intake, and set his safe min and safe max values for that constraint, we ran the Advanced Optimizer. Again, it took almost 2 minutes, so I sped that part of the video up. When we got solutions, again the optimizer was not able to generate diets that met the constraints and so offered the solutions that most met the criteria, with a note of what constraints were not met. It is important to note that optimizing should be viewed as an iterative process. The best results will come from running the optimizer, maybe adjusting ingredients or constraints, then running it again. For this tutorial, we could have created a farm and a diet that easily solved, but it was not real life, and as Tom explained in the beginning, this is a real farm with real cows and real feeds that have realistic inventory constraints and actual feed analysis values.
So here we are now with, I also had gone back and changed the the minimums on ME and MP to 105%. You can see it's now finding solutions, and as it's finding them, it will show them on screen and show you what the best cost it's found so far. Now at this point, we could just say stop optimization and select from the group that it's already found, or we can let it finish. And you can see it came back. It got rid of all of the other ones because they were not the best solution, and gave us this one that it returned that this fits all constraints. And there's our cost or income over feed cost. So, you know, it's like doing any level of optimization. Let's just accept that and return. And let me turn snapshots on and we can compare them side by side. And you can see this optimized diet cost us 3 cents, which isn't surprising given what it had to do was really bring down the fermentable starch. We were up at 22.6, and we brought it down to 20.7, which means when we look on the recipe side that it actually, there's some pretty big changes here in the amount of corn that it was using and the amount of this chocolate candy cookie byproduct. So it was able to reduce that fermentable starch, and it actually brought in some, we ended up with a little bit more sugar and probably a little bit more soluble fiber in this diet as well. So at this point, it would just be evaluating it for everything else, including things like whatever we wanted for minerals, or if there was any little things that we wanted to change, say some rounding things here on the recipe side, and then decide if we're going to keep that diet or not. Ever since we started testing this version, this optimization, I've been playing with it with real diets, and I've actually been feeding diets that it's returned. I've been extremely pleased. One of our frustrations with the previous optimizer we had was there was many times where it could not find a solution, or the solutions it was finding were very similar to what our base diet was. That is not the case with this new optimizer. We're actually seeing it return feedable diets on a regular basis, and even its suboptimal diets that it returns, many times they are quite close to meeting all of our constraints, and gives us, at a minimum, it gives us a good working base to do some cleanup formulation manually. Other times, and again, this would be the majority of the time, it's giving us diets that we should all feel comfortable implementing, because they are fitting all of the constraints that we are throwing at the problem. Again, being nonlinear, we can throw any constraint at it that we want. But the reality is, I see people doing this with optimization on a somewhat regular basis, where they end up double constraining themselves. For example, they may have forage constraints that say between 50 and 55%. But then when we look at the amount of forage that they have available for the optimizer, the maximum they could ever achieve would be, say, 45%. So it would never be able to find a solution. So there's little things like that you have to be looking at. Optimization is a tool to help evaluate lots of diets, but you still have to set your constraints up that are realistic. And we do have some checks built in. For example, if I were to try to constrain for Monensin, it would say, no, you can't do it because you don't have any ingredients that contain Monensin. The other thing is, by keeping this to a small group of constraints, we're only talking 3, 5, 8, 9 constraints for this total diet. However, when you look at what those constraints are, they actually represent all of the calculations of the model. If, for example, if we were to look at constraining this constraint on fermentable starch, well, that constraint on fermentable starch includes the starch content of the diet, the intake level of the diet, the degradation rates of each ingredient, starch pool, passage rates, everything. It's actually in this one single constraint, we're picking up multiple variables at once. The same goes with ME and MP versus just going to something like crude protein as an example. MP is integrating everything within the model, the carbohydrate side, microbial yield, bypass calculations, intestinal digestibilities. So it's really a very complex constraint to optimize for. And it really does encompass the entire biology of the model. So that's why just these handful of constraints that I use really do encompass the entire model and make these optimizations result in very realistic diets. If you have questions on doing any of this, feel free to reach out to us, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you for taking the time to view this tutorial. We hope it provides useful information that improves your program use and helps make your time formulating with our program more effective. If your subscription does not presently include the Advanced Optimizer and you would like to trial, please email support@agmodelsystems.com. As always, we value your thoughtful feedback on this and any of our program features. You will find more videos and resources, as well as our very popular The Nutritionist webinar series on the web at agmodelsystems.com.